The blow landed with clinical accuracy. For 4 unbearable years, Vincent Rothschild had been the unchallenged monarch of Westbrook Elite Academy, perched atop a cafeteria table as though the entire world belonged to him. Everything changed when Lawrence Sinclair's knuckles made contact. The strike sent reverberations throughout the table's surface, catapulting dishes into the air in a chaotic spectacle. Red streams of pasta arced overhead as beverages erupted in sugary geysers. Vincent's frame flew in reverse, his costly jacket fluttering like damaged wings until his back collided with the ground, producing a noise that drew simultaneous gasps from 400 onlookers. Lauren remained motionless, her silvery hair gleaming under the overhead lighting, breathing with the composure of someone who'd simply wiped away a speck of dirt. Has anyone ever witnessed someone completely defy assumptions in a single instant? Perhaps you've observed the reserve student demonstrate remarkable ability, or watched someone attractive reveal they're also brilliantly lethal. I'd appreciate hearing your experience in the comments section. Share your location and describe a moment when someone's concealed capabilities left you completely stunned. Should narratives like this about surprising strength resonate with you, please think about selecting the appreciation button below this content. Your backing allows these accounts to find people who need to understand that surface appearances rarely reveal the complete reality. I'm grateful for your presence here today. Exactly 72 hours before this moment, Lauren Sinclair had entered Westbrook Elite Academy on a Monday that appeared specifically crafted to display her otherworldly attractiveness. Her pale complexion appeared luminous beneath the unforgiving institutional lights, while her silver locks flowed like molten metal with every movement. She dressed in designer garments with refined sophistication that suggested inherited wealth instead of recently acquired fortune. Every observer turned as she moved past, both males and females, attracted to her presence like insects to an exceptionally refined flame. Speculation trailed behind her regarding her background, with hypotheses spanning from Swiss preparatory institutions to French modeling houses to Russian dance companies. None detected the deliberately hidden calluses marking her knuckles, concealed under costly makeup that perfectly matched her complexion. They overlooked how her gaze surveyed each space, not with the empty admiration of attractiveness, but with the strategic evaluation of someone noting escape routes, vulnerable areas, and possible dangers. Her seat selections in every classroom consistently placing her spine against walls with unobstructed views of all entrances, led instructors to believe she simply had environmental preferences. Westbrook's social stratification functioned with the merciless effectiveness of a feudal system. Vincent Rothschild governed from its peak with the thoughtless brutality of someone who'd experienced zero repercussions. At 6 feet 2 inches tall with features befitting classical sculpture, he led the lacrosse squad with the identical authoritarian approach his parent employed managing a $3 billion investment firm. Vincent accumulated attractive females the way others accumulated rare wines. Each acquisition was deliberately chosen, controlled, and ultimately abandoned when their amusement value expired. His closest associates included Sterling Brennan, whose diplomat parent granted him virtual immunity from most consequences, and Dimitri Cross, whose mother's federal judgeship made even instructors reconsider before confronting him. Collectively, they had refined what they termed the initiation ceremony for appealing new female enrollees, a methodical operation of pursuit, control, and mental devastation that had forced no fewer than 5 females from Westbrook over the preceding 2 years. Isabella Carmichael had endured precisely 14 days before her guardians discreetly removed her and moved to Spain. Anastasia Volkov survived 21 days before transitioning to home education. Citing anxiety disorders everyone understood originated from Vincent's focus. The sequence was reliable and merciless in its directness. Vincent would make contact. Attraction tactics would prove ineffective. Subsequently came the demands, the communal segregation, the murmured warnings about consequences for females who failed to comprehend their position in Westbrook's structure. Most females either accepted dating him for security or abandoned the institution completely. A third alternative didn't exist in Vincent's universe, or hadn't existed until Lauren settled into the cafeteria with her meal of Greek yogurt, apple slices, and electrolyte beverage. Her food selection reflected someone who regarded their physique as a meticulously maintained instrument rather than an ornamental item. Vincent had approached her location on her initial day with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered the term No, delivered with authentic determination. He'd positioned himself over her eating area, his fragrance aggressive and costly, and presented his typical introduction regarding how she occupied his cafeteria territory. Lauren hadn't glanced upward from her yogurt, merely stating she noticed no identification marking anything. The slight had been sufficiently public that Vincent's associates had observed, Sterling elevating an eyebrow, while Dimitri grinned behind his palm. Vincent had moved nearer, his voice lowering to what he regarded as his threatening tone, notifying her that everything attractive in this institution eventually carried his designation, and she'd discover that promptly. That moment marked when Lauren had finally elevated her gaze to encounter his. Something within those glacial azure depths caused Vincent to retreat one pace involuntarily. She'd examined him with the detached objectivity of someone reviewing medical documentation, identifying manifestations of an illness she'd encountered excessively before. Her tone had been agreeable, nearly cordial, when she informed him she'd encountered 100 males precisely like him. Identical phrases, identical tactics, identical essential fragility masquerading as power. The cafeteria had grown sufficiently quiet to detect the mechanical humming of refreshment dispensers. Everyone anticipated observing how Vincent would address this unprecedented challenge to his dominance. He'd regained composure rapidly, dismissing it as newcomer bewilderment, assuring her she'd comprehend the regulations promptly. However, Lauren had already disregarded him, resuming her meal as though he'd entirely ceased existing. The disrespect had been so thorough, so visible that Vincent possessed no alternative except intensification. His standing demanded it. Westbrook's meticulous social construction necessitated that challenges receive devastating responses. Demonstrations had to be established for those who neglected their hierarchical position. By Tuesday dawn, Vincent had commenced circulating gossip about Lauren, characterizing her as a frigid individual who considered herself superior to everyone at Westbrook. He directed his associates to render her existence subtly challenging. Literature knocked from her grasp in corridors, her identity mysteriously eliminated from organizational registration documents, instructors abruptly neglecting to acknowledge her elevated hand during instruction. Yet Lauren had maneuvered these trivial barriers with identical calm indifference she'd displayed toward Vincent's initial contact, as though she participated in a competition whose regulations only she comprehended. Wednesday's dining period arrived with tension typically reserved for athletic championships or concluding examinations. The complete student population appeared to perceive that something significant was approaching. Discussions diminished to murmurs as Vincent entered the cafeteria, accompanied by Sterling and Dimitri. He wore his most costly ensemble, a customized jacket that likely exceeded most students' vehicle costs, his lacrosse championship jewelry capturing light like a warning signal. Lauren occupied her customary location, systematically consuming a salad she'd transported from residence, seemingly unaware of the approaching tempest. Vincent didn't simply walk to her location, but rather executed a triumph procession, receiving acknowledgments and expressions from those anxious to maintain his approval. Upon reaching Lauren's position, he didn't occupy a chair like a typical person, but instead positioned himself directly atop the table itself, his designer footwear located inches from her nourishment in a dominance exhibition that would have prompted most students to immediately apologize. Lauren continued consuming food, her actions unhurried and exact, as though Vincent represented nothing beyond an unusually configured furniture piece that had materialized in her. Peripheral awareness. The offensive being disregarded caused Vincent's jaw to tighten sufficiently that Sterling genuinely appeared worried. Vincent reached toward Lauren's water container with intentional slowness, ensuring everyone in the cafeteria could observe what was imminent. He removed the cap and commenced pouring the liquid over her meticulously assembled salad, the water expanding across the vegetation and accumulating on her serving dish. The cafeteria became soundless except for water splashing and the distant noise of someone releasing their utensil in astonishment. This represented Vincent's characteristic action, the visible humiliation that preceded complete social annihilation. Everyone understood what followed in the sequence. The target would either weep, escape, or plead for clemency. Vincent would magnanimously acknowledge their capitulation with stipulations that guaranteed their absolute submission to his dominance. However, Lauren simply positioned down her utensil with a gentle click that somehow transmitted across the complete space. She elevated her gaze toward Vincent with those arctic eyes, and something in her demeanor caused Dmitri to retreat one pace unconsciously. Vincent, excessively committed to his demonstration to detect his companion's unease, initiated his rehearsed discourse about Westbrook's operational procedures. He clarified with condescending tolerance that she possessed two selections. She could become his companion with all accompanying security and advantage, or she could become invisible, a phantom drifting through Westbrook's passages with zero companions, zero pursuits, zero recognition of her presence. He extracted his mobile device with dramatic emphasis, displaying his contact registry filled with designations of every significant person at Westbrook and beyond. One message, he guaranteed, and every entrance would seal to her. The cheerleading squad would decline her submission. Academic groups would abruptly reach capacity. Even instructors would experience mysterious memory lapses regarding her identity. Sterling and Dmitri relocated into arrangement, surrounding Lauren's seat to physically underscore how confined she was in this instant. Vincent descended and contacted Lauren's hair, allowing the platinum strands to flow through his digits with controlling familiarity. He remarked what a tragedy it would constitute to squander such attractiveness on something as worthless as dignity, his tone conveying the type of casual threat that had shattered dozens of females before Lauren. This represented the instant when they typically fractured, when the mixture of visible humiliation, communal warnings, and physical intimidation overwhelmed their opposition. Vincent had refined this procedure over years of implementation, understood precisely how much force to administer and where to locate the fracture points in adolescent female psychology. He had acquired knowledge from his parent that authority wasn't merely about possessing it, but about exhibiting it in methods that rendered resistance appear not merely futile, but foolish. Lauren's tone, when she ultimately vocalized, was sufficiently quiet that individuals in the cafeteria's rear had to incline forward to perceive her. She instructed Vincent to eliminate his hand from her hair immediately. The words conveyed a significance that appeared to modify the chamber's temperature. Vincent expressed amusement, the noise sharp and derisive, his digits intensifying their grasp on her hair as he inquired what she believed she could accomplish regarding it. Would she weep? Would she summon her parent? The mockery in his tone was rehearsed and merciless, engineered to eliminate any remaining dignity from his targets. Lauren commenced counting in a tone absent of emotion, initiating with 1. Sterling genuinely expressed amusement at this, creating a remark about the newcomer believing she existed in kindergarten. When Lauren achieved 2, Vincent pulled her hair more forcefully, compelling her skull backward at an uncomfortable angle, while notifying her that he controlled this institution and consequently controlled her. The words were presented with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never confronted genuine repercussions, never encountered a force he couldn't acquire, threaten, or manipulate into capitulation. Lauren stated 3 with the conclusiveness of a magistrate pronouncing a terminal verdict. She elevated gradually, Vincent maintaining his grasp on her hair, evidently entertained by what he presumed would be a futile resistance attempt. Her subsequent words would torment Vincent's dreams for subsequent months. She informed him he should have heeded, and something in her delivery method caused smartphones to emerge throughout the cafeteria, students perceiving that whatever transpired next would merit documentation. Vincent separated his lips to present another warning. However, Lauren was already relocating with the type of deliberate effectiveness that distinguished trained combatants from angry amateurs. The strike was a creation of brutal excellence, a flawless right cross that would have prompted professional boxers to signal approval. Lauren's complete physique relocated as one mechanism, power flowing from her established rear foot through her rotating pelvis, ascending her torso, and descending her limb in a kinetic sequence that amplified force at every connection. Her knuckles connected with Vincent's mandible while he remained positioned on the table, the trajectory perfect for optimal impact. The connection noise was moist and substantial, nothing resembling the comic publication sound that cinema had instructed students to anticipate. Vincent's skull snapped rearward so violently that momentarily it appeared physically separated from his frame, his perfectly arranged hair exploding into disorder. The momentum transmitted through his complete structure, elevating him from the table and propelling him airborne in a backward trajectory that contradicted the typical regulations of adolescent cafeteria physics. The table responded to Vincent's abrupt evacuation by propelling its contents skyward in an exhibition that would have been nearly aesthetic if it weren't so stunning. Dishes became rotating discs, spinning through atmosphere, trailing pasta like crimson streamers. Containers exploded their liquids in fountain-resembling trajectories, coating adjacent students with carbonated beverages and juice. A receptacle of fruit mixture achieved a temporary moment of weightlessness. Individual fragments of melon and grape suspended like miniature celestial bodies before gravity reasserted itself. Vincent's frame completed its trajectory by colliding with the ground with an impact that vibrated windows and transmitted oscillations through the ancient flooring. He landed horizontally on his dorsal surface, limbs extended broadly like a snow angel constructed of privilege and inadequate decisions. His eyes rotated backward to display only whites. The quietness that succeeded was so absolute that everyone could detect the drip of spilled beverages contacting the ground in a pattern that resembled applause. Sterling Brennan regained from his astonishment initially, his hockey participant reflexes superseding his judgment as he propelled at Lauren from her left flank. He succeeded in vocalizing most of a profanity before Lauren rotated with the elegance of a dancer and the accuracy of a surgeon. Her hands located his extending wrist with rehearsed facility, and abruptly Sterling discovered he no longer governed his own momentum. Lauren performed a hip projection that judo specialists would have identified as a flawless ogoshi, utilizing Sterling's own force against him in a method that transformed his size benefit into a disadvantage. The hockey participant discovered himself airborne for the second occasion in his athletic existence, though this flight was substantially less voluntary than his initial one. He collided with an adjacent table with sufficient force to collapse its supports, propelling him sprawling among the destruction of abandoned meals and curved metal. The noise he produced upon landing was partially surprise, partially discomfort, and completely undignified. Dmitri Cross possessed marginally superior survival reflexes than his companions, immediately elevating his hands in capitulation and retreating from Lauren with the deliberate movements of someone who just comprehended they'd cornered what they assumed was a domestic feline, but proved to be a panther. He attempted to vocalize to clarify that he desired zero difficulty, but his backward momentum was interrupted by Vincent's unconscious configuration. Dimitri's foot captured on Vincent's extended limb, propelling him tumbling rearward in a graceless accumulation that concluded with him scrambling across the ground on all extremities, attempting to establish as much separation as feasible between himself and the blonde female who'd just demolished his complete social circle in fewer than 10 seconds. Lauren observed his withdrawal with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining predictable outcomes, executing no action to pursue someone who'd clearly eliminated himself as a danger. The cafeteria remained suspended in a tableau of disbelief. 400 students attempting to process what they just observed. Devices were maintained elevated, but numerous individuals had neglected to genuinely document, their minds excessively overwhelmed by the contradiction between Lauren's delicate appearance and the devastation she just executed. Vincent remained unconscious on the ground, blood beginning to accumulate beneath his clearly fractured nose, his respiration ragged but present. Sterling expressed discomfort from within the table destruction, attempting unsuccessfully to separate himself from the curved metal and dispersed nourishment. Dmitri had compressed himself against the distant wall, his physical language communicating submission and terror in equivalent measure. In the center of this disorder, Lauren calmly resumed her seat, retrieved her apple from where it had rolled to security, and executed a deliberate bite. The crunch reverberated through the silent cafeteria like punctuation at the conclusion of a particularly emphatic sentence. She masticated thoughtfully, swallowed, and subsequently inquired of the chamber at large whether anyone else desired to discuss ownership. Her tone was conversational and agreeable, as though she hadn't just revolutionized Westbrook's complete social construction with her knuckles. The enchantment fractured when someone ultimately succeeded in vocalizing for the medical professional. The noise activated an avalanche of responses as students abruptly recalled how to relocate and vocalize. Some hastened toward the exits, whether from apprehension or excitement unclear. Others compressed nearer, devices ultimately documenting as they attempted to capture the aftermath of what would certainly become Westbrook legend. A few of Vincent's typical admirers remained suspended in position, their worldview shattered by observing their untouchable monarch positioned like a discarded plaything. The institutional medical professional arrived with the velocity of someone who'd been anticipating this summons for years, though likely not with Lauren Sinclair as the cause. She executed one observation of Vincent's condition and immediately summoned for backup, identifying a concussion when she observed one. The procedure for cranial injuries was rigorous and non-negotiable, particularly when the victim's parent could acquire the institution multiple times over. Principal Morrison materialized moments subsequently, his facial features cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and calculation as he attempted to process the scene before him. His typical morning golf competition with Vincent's parent abruptly appeared like a lifetime ago as he observed the unconscious youth who represented millions in contributions to Westbrook's endowment. The principal's hands trembled as he extracted his device, understanding he was approaching one of the most unpleasant discussions of his administrative existence. Before he could activate dialing, the institution's security administrator was already reviewing footage on his tablet, his expression developing more incredulous with each replay. He murmured something to Principal Morrison that caused the older male's facial features to lose what minimal color remained. The term professional drifted across to adjacent students, succeeded by Olympic caliber and trained combatant, each phrase adding another layer to the mystery of Lauren Sinclair. The ambulance arrived with its sirens muted but illumination flashing. The emergency medical technicians relocating with rehearsed effectiveness as they stabilized Vincent's cervical area and carefully loaded him onto a wheeled stretcher. He was commencing to stir, his eyes unfocused and confused, mumbling something about his parent that caused Principal Morrison's anxiety to visibly intensify. Sterling had been extracted from the table destruction and was positioned on the ground, maintaining his ribcage, repeatedly insisting he was acceptable while obviously being anything except. Dimitri hadn't relocated from his arrangement against the wall, evidently having decided that remaining perfectly motionless might render him invisible to whatever force of nature Lauren represented. The emergency medical technicians decided to transport all three males for evaluation, though only Vincent's injuries appeared serious enough to necessitate immediate intervention. Lauren discovered herself in Principal Morrison's chamber 20 minutes subsequently, occupying a chair that likely exceeded most individuals' monthly rental costs. While the principal paced behind his desk, resembling a confined animal, he maintained initiating sentences and subsequently stopping as though incapable of locating words adequate to address what had just transpired. The security administrator remained in the corner, tablet in hand, occasionally shaking his cranium in amazement at what the footage revealed. Lauren occupied space with flawless posture, hands folded in her lap, appearing for all the world like she anticipated a routine guardian-instructor conference, rather than confronting possible assault accusations. When Morrison ultimately located his voice, his initial inquiry was regarding where she'd acquired knowledge to combat like that. Lauren's response was characteristically modest, mentioning that her parent had emphasized self-defense instruction following an incident in their previous neighborhood. When pressed for particulars about what type of instruction, she simply responded that they were the effective type, the variety that emphasized terminating confrontations rapidly rather than extending them. The security administrator couldn't restrain himself any further, exclaiming that the strike Lauren had executed was technically flawless, the type of structure that required years to cultivate under expert instruction. He'd been an amateur boxer in his youth and identified quality when he observed it. Lauren elevated her shoulders with the type of false modesty that suggested she understood precisely how proficient she was, but observed no purpose in boasting about it. She clarified that she'd possessed excellent instructors who believed that if you were going to acquire knowledge of something, you might as well acquire knowledge properly. The discussion was interrupted by Morrison's device ringing with the summons he'd been dreading. Vincent's parent's voice could be detected, even though the device wasn't on speaker mode, demanding responses, threatening litigation, guaranteeing to annihilate anyone involved in his offspring's injury. Morrison attempted to clarify, but the elder Rothschild wasn't interested in clarifications, only retribution. The entrance to Morrison's chamber opened without a knock, and in walked Ms. Adelaide Chin, the advanced placement biology instructor whose reputation for accepting zero nonsense was legendary even among Westbrook's entitled student population. She maintained her device in one hand and a folder, substantial with papers in the other, her expression suggesting she'd been anticipating this moment for an extensive duration. Morrison initiated to object to the interruption, but Adelaide interrupted him with an elevated hand and an expression that could have solidified lava. She announced that she'd observed the complete incident and had been documenting Vincent Rothschild's conduct for the preceding 2 years, her tone conveying the type of quiet dominance that caused everyone in the chamber to pay attention. The folder she positioned on Morrison's desk landed with a sound that appeared to reverberate with the significance of evidence it contained. Adelaide commenced extracting printed screenshots, photographs, and transcript after transcript of complaints that had been filed and mysteriously vanished from official documentation. She possessed electronic mail from Isabella Carmichael's guardians pleading for assistance before they'd escaped to Spain. She possessed medical documentation from Anastasia Volkov's therapy sessions, deliberately redacted but still clearly displaying the psychological damage Vincent had executed. There were observer statements from students excessively frightened to advance officially, security footage from incidents that had supposedly been eliminated, and a detailed timeline of how each female Vincent had targeted had been systematically isolated and fractured. Morrison's facial features developed paler with each piece of evidence, comprehending that Adelaide had constructed a case that would annihilate not merely Vincent but potentially the complete administrative construction that had enabled him. The security administrator was reviewing his tablet again when he executed a discovery that modified everything. He'd been searching for Lauren Sinclair in various databases, attempting to comprehend who they were managing. When he located it, a small mention in a Detroit newspaper from 2 years previously, deliberately buried but not completely eliminated. Lauren had been the junior Golden Gloves champion in the female welterweight classification at age 15 with a record that suggested she'd been virtually untouchable in the ring. However, subsequently something had transpired, an incident that resulted in sealed, juvenile documentation and a sudden termination to what should have been a promising boxing existence. The particulars were frustratingly vague, but there were implications about 3 males who'd attempted to assault Lauren's training associate following a match, and how Lauren had intervened with results that necessitated multiple ambulances. Adelaide observed Lauren with new comprehension, identifying a kindred spirit in the combat against predators who believed their currency and connections rendered them untouchable. She rotated to Morrison and notified him that if the institution attempted to punish Lauren for defending herself, every piece of evidence in that folder would be transmitted to the State Education Board, the media, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. The warning wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Morrison appeared like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes, collapsed in his chair as he comprehended the scope of the crisis confronting Westbrook. The device rang again, and this occasion Morrison positioned it on speaker mode, excessively exhausted to maintain any pretense of governance over the situation. Vincent's parents' tone filled the chamber like toxic gas, demanding that Lauren be expelled immediately and criminal accusations filed. He ranted about his offspring's injuries, the humiliation, the damage to their family's standing. However, before Morrison could respond, Adelaide seized the device and introduced herself. She notified Mr. Rothschild that his offspring had sexually assaulted a student by seizing her hair and declining to release her despite clear verbal warnings. She possessed observers, video evidence, and a sequence of similar conduct stretching back years. If he desired to pursue accusations, she would guarantee that every news outlet in the state received copies of Vincent's greatest hits, including some recordings he likely didn't understand existed. The quietness on the other terminus of the line stretched for so extensively that Morrison verified to ensure the summons hadn't disconnected. When Rothschild vocalized again, his tone had lost its bluster, replaced by the calculating tone of someone reassessing a business transaction gone inadequate. He inquired what it would require to cause this situation to vanish, the inquiry revealing everything about how he'd managed Vincent's previous indiscretions. Adelaide's response was swift and merciless. Vincent would withdraw from Westbrook immediately, citing medical reasons. He would undergo intensive therapy for his behavioral disorders. The family would establish a fund for the females Vincent had injured with Adelaide overseeing the distribution. And most importantly, they would never contact or approach Lauren Sinclair again. The terms were non-negotiable. and Rothschild possessed exactly 1 hour to decide before Adelaide initiated executing device summons to reporters she understood would appreciate a narrative about privilege, predation, and justice served with a right cross. The summons concluded with Rothschild's reluctant agreement, and Morrison collapsed further in his chair, appearing like a male observing his existence dissolve in real time. Adelaide rotated to Lauren and informed her she was liberated to resume to instruction, though she might desire to stop by the medical professional's chamber initially to have her knuckles examined. Lauren elevated gracefully, expressed gratitude to Adelaide for her intervention, and walked out of the chamber as calmly as she'd entered it. The security administrator observed her departure with something approaching awe, muttering that he'd never observed anyone that young with such flawless structure and governance. Adelaide gathered her folder, notified Morrison that she'd be observing for any retaliation against Lauren, and succeeded the female out, leaving the principal alone with the ruins of his deliberately constructed kingdom of willful ignorance. The cafeteria had been sealed for cleaning, but information of what had transpired spread through Westbrook like wildfire. Recordings of the confrontation were already circulating on social media, though they maintained getting mysteriously deleted, only to reappear from new accounts. Lauren walked through the passages to a symphony of murmurs and stares, some admiring, some fearful, all tinged with disbelief that someone had ultimately stood up to Vincent Rothschild and prevailed. Females who'd suffered under Vincent's attention observed her with something approaching worship, while males who'd emulated Vincent's conduct abruptly discovered reasons to avoid the passages Lauren might utilize. The communal arrangement that had appeared as permanent as gravity had been shattered with a single strike, and nobody quite understood what would replace it. Lauren discovered an unexpected ally in Scarlett Washington, the captain of the debate squad, who'd succeeded in avoiding Vincent's attention by being neither attractive enough to attract him, nor unattractive enough to merit tormenting. Scarlett approached Lauren in the library during study period, sliding into the seat across from her with the type of deliberate movements that suggested she was approaching a potentially dangerous animal. She expressed gratitude to Lauren for what she'd executed, clarifying that her younger sibling had been one of Vincent's targets the previous year and had only escaped serious trauma because their guardians possessed the resources to employ security to escort her to and from institution. The narrative emerged in murmurs, how Vincent had cornered the female following an institution dance, how only the arrival of her bodyguard had prevented something terrible from transpiring, how the family had been excessively frightened of the Rothschilds' influence to press accusations. The discussion was interrupted by Lauren's device buzzing with a message from an unknown number. She read it with no modification in expression, but Scarlett detected her knuckles tightened slightly, the only indication of any emotional response. Lauren excused herself and walked to the parking area, where a black sedan with tinted windows occupied space idling. The female who stepped out wore a costly suit that communicated lawyer from every precisely tailored seam. She introduced herself as Patricia Hartwell from Hartwell Associates and clarified that she'd been transmitted by the Carmichael family. The mention of Isabella Carmichael's designation caused several pieces to click into position for Lauren, though she maintained her expression neutral as Patricia clarified the complete scope of what had genuinely brought Lauren to Westbrook. The reality was more calculated than anyone could have imagined. Isabella Carmichael's attempted suicide following Vincent's assault had nearly succeeded, leaving her in a coma for 3 weeks. When she'd ultimately recovered, her family had desired justice, but understood the Rothschilds' influence rendered legal remedies impossible. Instead, they'd reached out through back channels to locate someone who could deliver a different type of justice, the type that would guarantee Vincent never injured another female again. They'd located Lauren through her parent, who operated a self-defense program for assault survivors and had mentioned her offspring's unique combination of skills and controlled temperament. The Carmichaels had offered to pay for Lauren's education at any institution she chose if she would transfer to Westbrook and anticipate Vincent to inevitably target her. Lauren had volunteered without hesitation, possessing her own reasons for desiring to confront predators, who believed their privilege protected them from repercussions. The sealed juvenile documentation from Detroit narrated a narrative of a female who'd discovered her best companion being assaulted by 3 college males in a parking structure and had intervened with such devastating effectiveness that one attacker had necessitated facial reconstruction surgery. The accusations against Lauren had been dropped when security footage revealed the complete context. But the incident had terminated her official boxing existence and marked her as someone dangerous, enough that most institutions wouldn't accept her regardless of her academic achievements. Westbrook had been willing to overlook her past because the Carmichaels' recommendation arrived with a generous contribution, though the administration possessed no idea they were essentially importing their own destruction. Patricia handed Lauren an envelope containing a bank card and documents confirming that her tuition at any university she chose would be fully covered along with living expenses, and a substantial sum for her parents' self-defense program. The Carmichaels desired Lauren to understand that Isabella was recovering, that observing the recording of Vincent's defeat had provided her a sense of closure she'd believed impossible. There was also a request, though Patricia emphasized it was entirely optional. Other families had reached out, families with offspring at different institutions confronting similar situations. Would Lauren consider continuing what she'd initiated at Westbrook? The inquiry hung in the atmosphere like an invitation to war, and Lauren's expression when she accepted was sharp enough to cut glass. Back at institution, the aftermath of Vincent's removal created a power vacuum that might have led to disorder if not for an unexpected development. Sterling Brennan, released from the hospital with bruised ribcage and a newfound appreciation for repercussions, approached Lauren during lunch the subsequent day. He didn't attempt to occupy space at her table, maintaining a respectful separation as he apologized not merely for his actions but for years of enabling Vincent's conduct. He admitted he'd understood what Vincent was executing was incorrect but had been excessively caught up in the benefits of being in his inner circle to care about the victims. The apology appeared genuine, though Lauren's expression suggested she'd reserve judgment until she observed actual modification in conduct. Sterling's visible acknowledgement of wrongdoing transmitted shockwaves through the institution's male population, many of whom had modeled themselves after Vincent's example. Dimitri Cross transferred institutions within a week, his parent, the federal magistrate, evidently deciding that separation was the better part of valor when it came to Lauren Sinclair. His evacuation was so abrupt that he left half his possessions in his locker, as though staying even sufficiently extensively to clean it out might risk another encounter with the female who demolished his companions with such casual effectiveness. Other members of Vincent's extended circle commenced reassessing their conduct, some out of genuine reflection, but most out of simple self-preservation. The message had been received loud and clear, that the old regulations no longer applied, that wealth and connection weren't shields against someone trained and willing to combat back. Adelaide Chen became Lauren's unofficial mentor at Westbrook, though their relationship was more that of fellow soldiers than instructor and student. She shared narratives of her own battles against institutional indifference, how she documented every incident because she'd understood that eventually someone would arrive who could utilize that information to create genuine modification. Together, they established new procedures for reporting harassment, with Adelaide guaranteeing that no complaint would ever again vanish into administrative convenience. The modifications weren't merely procedural, but cultural, with assemblies addressing consent and respect in methods that previous administrations would have regarded excessively controversial for their contributors' delicate sensibilities. A month following the cafeteria incident, Lauren received another message, this one from a female designated Olivia at a private institution in Boston. The message included photographs of bruises, deliberately hidden beneath costly clothing, and an inquiry that reverberated Isabella Carmichael's desperation. Could Lauren assist? The network Patricia had mentioned was acquiring shape, an underground railroad of females trained to combat back against predators who believed their currency rendered them untouchable. Lauren's parent had expanded her self-defense program with the Carmichael funding, specifically recruiting females who'd been victims and training them not merely in physical combat, but in the legal and psychological aspects of confronting systematic abuse. Principal Morrison announced his early retirement at the conclusion of the semester, citing health concerns that everyone understood were genuinely legal concerns. His replacement was a female-designated Dr. Janet Thornton, who'd established her reputation cleaning up corrupt athletic programs at major universities. Her initial action was to invite Adelaide Chen to become assistant principal for student affairs, a position that provided her the dominance to implement the reform she'd been combating since she'd initiated teaching. The old guard of Westbrook's administration discovered themselves either adapting to the new reality or seeking employment elsewhere, their enablement of predators like Vincent no longer tolerated or ignored. Lauren's genuine identity as a trained combatant became an open secret at Westbrook. Though the complete extent of her mission remained understood only to a select few, she continued attending instruction, maintaining excellent grades, and consuming her deliberately measured meals in the cafeteria. However, now when she walked through the passages, there was space around her, not from apprehension, but from respect. Females who'd never possessed the courage to report harassment discovered themselves approaching her, sharing their narratives, inquiring for advice. Lauren listened to each one, executed notes, and connected them with resources, constructing a network of support that extended far beyond Westbrook's walls. The semester was drawing to a close when Lauren detected something unusual during lunch. A new student had materialized without the typical fanfare that accompanied transfers to Westbrook. She was strikingly attractive in an entirely different method from Lauren, with raven black hair and emerald eyes that appeared to absorb everything while revealing nothing. She occupied space alone at a corner table, consuming with the identical mechanical precision Lauren identified from her own movements. The female's positioning was flawless, spine against the wall, exits catalogued, hands never distant from her bag, which appeared to contain more than merely textbooks based on how it shifted when she relocated it. 3 males from the lacrosse squad, evidently not having acquired knowledge from Vincent's example, commenced approaching the new female with the type of confidence that suggested they believed the power vacuum necessitated filling. Lauren observed with professional curiosity as the males surrounded the female's table, one of them extending for her hair in an action so similar to Vincent's that it might have been intentional tribute. The new female's hand relocated faster than most individuals could track, intercepting the male's wrist and administering precisely sufficient force to cause him to vocalize pain. She observed directly at Lauren across the cafeteria and acknowledged slightly, a salutation between professionals that the remainder of the institution wouldn't comprehend. Lauren expressed amusement and resumed to her apple, identifying the commencement of something larger than merely her mission at Westbrook. The new female released the male's wrist and suggested quite pleasantly that he and his companions locate somewhere else to be, her tone conveying the identical significance of implied repercussions that Lauren had refined. As the males retreated in bewilderment and apprehension, the new female extracted her device and transmitted a message. Lauren's device buzzed a moment subsequently with 2 words that confirmed what she'd suspected. Phase 2. The network Patricia had described wasn't merely about responding to individual predators anymore. It was about systematically dismantling the culture that created and protected them, one institution at a time. The cafeteria resumed to its normal buzz of discussion, but underneath the familiar rhythms of adolescent existence, something fundamental had shifted. The hunters were becoming the hunted. The protectors were being exposed, and a generation of females was acquiring knowledge that they didn't have to accept victimization as the price of education. Lauren concluded her meal and prepared for her subsequent instruction, but her mind was already on what arrived next. The new female across the cafeteria was merely the commencement. There were others being trained, others being positioned, others prepared to guarantee that what transpired to Isabella Carmichael would never transpire again. As the bell rang and students filed out of the cafeteria, Lauren captured one final glimpse of the new female's bag shifting as she elevated. The outline of what resembled boxing wraps was briefly visible through the fabric before being concealed again. The message was clear without words being vocalized. Westbrook Elite Academy was no longer a hunting ground for predators. It was now a training ground for those who hunted them. And somewhere in Boston, another female was reading Olivia's message that assistance was arriving, that she wouldn't have to confront her tormentors alone, that the network created by one flawless strike in a Connecticut cafeteria was spreading like wildfire through the deliberately manicured lawns of privilege and power. The revolution hadn't been televised, but it had been uploaded, shared, and murmured about in passages across the nation. Lauren Sinclair had executed the initial strike, but she wouldn't execute the final one. The new female's presence confirmed what Patricia had implied during their parking area encounter. This was larger than Westbrook, larger than Vincent. larger than any individual institution or predator. This was about modifying the complete ecosystem that allowed Vincent Rothschilds to flourish. And it would require an army of Lauren Sinclairs to accomplish it. As she walked to her subsequent instruction, Lauren's device buzzed again.